"I know how to heal him, miss," says mysterious boy to desperate nurse. Rachel Thompson held back tears as she watched the heart monitors. After 3 straight shifts, she felt the weight of responsibility on her shoulders, knowing the most important patient at Mercy General Hospital wasn't responding to any conventional treatments. That's when she sensed a presence beside her in the hallway. Turning, she saw a boy around 10 years old with dark hair and deep eyes, wearing a plain white t-shirt. "I know how to heal him, miss," the boy said, with a conviction that didn't match his age. Rachel almost dismissed the child, but something in his determined gaze made her pause. "Who are you?" she asked, discreetly wiping her eyes. "Children shouldn't be in this wing of the hospital." "My name is Ethan, and I know what Dr. Richard has," he replied, looking straight at the door of room 307, where the hospital director was admitted. Rachel's eyes widened. How did this boy know the patient's name? More importantly, how did he know the room number? That information was restricted to medical staff and family. "Listen, sweetheart, you shouldn't be here. I'll take you back to the pediatrics wing," Rachel said, forcing a smile as she gently held the boy's shoulder. "You haven't slept properly in 72 hours. You're worried because no one can figure out why Dr. Richard got worse after that new medicine they gave him last night," Ethan said calmly, as if discussing the weather. A chill ran down Rachel's spine. That was impossible. No one outside the core medical team knew about the experimental treatment. There was no way the boy could know. "How did you—" she began, but the sound of the heart monitor beeping frantically inside the room cut her off. "We don't have much time," Ethan said, his childlike expression suddenly far too mature. "Please, listen to me." Rachel stood at a crossroads. Her 15-year career at Mercy General, the largest hospital in Chicago, had never prepared her for this. On one hand, she needed to respond to the alarm and call the medical team. On the other, there was something inexplicably compelling about this child. 5 minutes, Rachel conceded, pulling the boy to a quieter corner while signaling to another passing nurse that she was aware of the alarm. "Tell me quickly, how do you know all this?" "My grandmother has been in oncology for 3 months. I come every day after school. I hear things, I see things, and I have a gift." Ethan hesitated. "My grandmother says it's a blessing from her Cherokee ancestors." Rachel took a deep breath. Any other time she'd dismissed this as a child's fantasy. But after 3 days watching Dr. Richard's condition deteriorate without explanation, she was willing to listen to even the unlikeliest theories. "What kind of gift?" she asked, keeping one eye on the clock. "I can see when a medicine isn't right for someone. There's a kind of shadow around them." He gestured, searching for words. "And Dr. Richard has had that shadow since they started giving him that new medicine." Rachel knew exactly which drug he meant, an experimental treatment for the rare condition doctors suspected the director had developed. The diagnosis was still uncertain, and the pressure to save the most influential man in the hospital was immense. "Ethan, you understand what you're saying is very serious, don't you?" Rachel knelt, meeting the boy's gaze. "We're talking about someone's life." "I know, miss, that's why I came to you. You're the only one who can go into the room anytime, and I know you really care about the patients." He looked deeply into her eyes. "The medicine he needs isn't that one. It's the same one my grandmother takes for her allergy." Rachel felt her heart race. Antihistamine. No one had considered an allergic reaction. All the preliminary tests had ruled out that possibility. But what if— The alarm sounded again, more insistent. "I have to go," she said, standing up. "Miss, the shadow is getting darker. There isn't much time." Ethan held her arm with surprising strength for his size. "You need to change the medicine." Rachel felt the weight of responsibility like never before. If she ignored the boy and followed protocol, she'd just be continuing a treatment that by all signs wasn't working. If she listened to him, she'd be risking her career based on the word of a child she barely knew. "I'll check for the possibility of a drug allergy," she decided, surprising herself. "But you need to go to your grandmother's wing. Now, and don't tell anyone, understood?" Ethan nodded solemnly, as if he understood the gravity of the situation. Before turning to leave, he added, "My grandmother always says sometimes it takes a child's eyes to see what adults can't." Rachel watched the boy walk down the hallway, his small frame contrasting with the white walls of the hospital. Then she took a deep breath and entered room 307, determined to save the director's life, even if it meant challenging everything she'd learned in her career. What she didn't know was that this unlikely encounter would change not only Dr. Richard's fate but her own forever. In the monitoring room, Rachel carefully observed the vital signs of Dr. Richard Anderson, the General Director of Mercy General Hospital. At 62, he was one of the most respected figures in medicine in Illinois, responsible for transforming the institution into a national benchmark. Now, paradoxically, he was at the mercy of the same medical protocols he'd helped establish. "Any changes?" asked Dr. Michael Roberts, the chief neurologist, entering the room with a worried expression. "No significant improvement since the last dose," Rachel replied, choosing her words carefully. "Actually, I noticed a slight change in heart rate right after the medication." Michael sighed, running his hands through his graying hair. "We're all exhausted, Rachel. Especially you. How many hours straight have you been here? 72? Go home, get some rest." "I'm fine," she insisted, thinking of the boy Ethan and his strange claim. "Dr. Michael, have we considered the possibility of an allergic reaction to the new medication?" The neurologist looked at her in surprise. "We ran all the standard tests before starting treatment. No signs of allergies." "Yes, but—" Rachel hesitated. How could she explain her hunch without mentioning the boy? Some reactions are rare and don't show up in conventional tests, and the symptoms worsened right after the new treatment began. Michael narrowed his eyes, studying her. "Rachel, you've always been extremely competent, but you're clearly exhausted. We can't change a protocol based on—" He paused. "Intuition. We need scientific evidence." She knew he was right. 15 years of nursing experience had taught her to trust established procedures, but something inside her couldn't ignore the boy's words. "What if we just run a specific test for allergies to the main compound in the medication?" she suggested, keeping her tone professional. "It wouldn't delay the current treatment, and we could rule it out." The neurologist seemed about to refuse, but the sound of the phone interrupted him. After a brief conversation, he hung up with a grave expression. "Dr. Elizabeth is on her way." "The latest test results aren't good at all." Dr. Elizabeth Carroll had been Dr. Richard's personal physician for over 20 years and had been called as soon as he was admitted. Her constant presence was both a comfort and an added pressure for the team. "Please consider my request," Rachel insisted. "Just a simple test while we wait for Dr. Elizabeth." After a moment of thought, Michael nodded reluctantly. "I'll authorize it, but keep following the current protocol in the meantime. And Rachel," he gave her a serious look, "don't get your hopes up." As soon as the doctor left, Rachel allowed herself a moment of relief. It was a small step, but it could make all the difference. While entering the test request into the system, she couldn't help thinking about the mysterious Ethan. How could a child know something experienced doctors hadn't considered? Determined to find him again, Rachel used her break to visit the oncology ward. The place was familiar to her. She had worked there for a few years before being transferred to the intensive care unit. She approached the nursing station, where her old colleague Michelle was organizing files. "Rachel, what? A surprise to see you here. I thought you were glued to Dr. Richard's case," Michelle remarked with a tired smile. "I'm just on a quick break," Rachel explained. "Actually, I'm looking for a boy named Ethan. His grandmother is a patient here. He must be about 10, with black hair and dark eyes." Michelle thought for a moment. "Oh, you must mean grandmother." "Ruth's grandson, that Cherokee woman in room 215. The boy is such a sweetheart. Always brings drawings for his grandmother." Rachel felt her heart race. So he hadn't lied about his grandmother. "Yes, exactly. Do you know if he's been here today?" "Not yet. He usually comes after school around 4. Grandmother Ruth is a complicated case, you know." Michelle lowered her voice. "Terminal cancer. But that woman has incredible strength. The doctors gave her 3 months at the start of the year, and look, it's June, and she's still fighting." Rachel nodded, absorbing the information. An idea was forming in her mind. "Michelle, would you mind if I stop by her room now?" Her colleague shrugged. "Go ahead." She loves visitors, and it seems you already know her grandson. Thanking her, Rachel walked down the oncology hallway, observing the patients in their beds. Some were reading, others watching TV, all united by the same invisible enemy. When she reached room 215, she gently knocked on the slightly open door. "Come in," answered a firm voice, surprisingly strong for someone in advanced cancer treatment. Grandmother Ruth was sitting in a chair by the window, a book in her lap, and a colorful blanket over her legs. Despite her age and illness, her dark eyes sparkled with vitality and wisdom. Her grey hair was neatly braided, and she smiled when she saw Rachel. "You're not my usual nurse," Grandmother Ruth observed, "but you have kind eyes. What brings you here, my child?" Rachel stepped closer, feeling strangely nervous. "Good afternoon, Grandmother Ruth. My name is Rachel. I'm a nurse in the ICU. I met your grandson Ethan today, and—" The older woman's smile widened. "Ah, my little healer," she exclaimed proudly. "What has he been up to this time?" Her expression confirmed what Rachel was beginning to suspect. Ethan had a habit of diagnosing patients. "He gave me some suggestions about a patient," Rachel explained carefully. "Said he can see when a medicine isn't working for someone." Grandmother Ruth nodded, as if this were perfectly normal. Ethan was born with the gift of seeing beyond. "The eyes," she explained, adjusting the blanket over her legs. "In my village, he would have been trained to be a medicine man. Here, in the world of white people, they call him too imaginative." She laughed softly. "But the boy sees things, feels things, and he's rarely wrong." Rachel sat in the chair next to the armchair, leaning slightly forward. "Grandmother Ruth, your grandson mentioned an anti-allergy medication you take. He said my patient might need the same." The older woman's expression grew thoughtful. "Yes, I take medication for severe allergies. I have a rare condition, hypersensitivity to the preservative sodium benzoate. It's in almost everything, you know. Even in medicines, the doctors took years to figure it out, and I almost—" She made a gesture as if brushing away an unpleasant thought. "Well, the important thing is they found out in time." Rachel felt a chill. The experimental medication given to Dr. Richard contained exactly that preservative, a detail buried in the fine print of the leaflet, easily overlooked when focused on the active ingredients. "The name of the medicine you take, would you mind telling me?" "Allashield 50 milligrams. I take 1 capsule a day. Why? Does your patient also have an allergy to sodium benzoate?" "Maybe," Rachel murmured, standing up. "Grandmother Ruth, thank you for talking with me. Your grandson is truly special." The woman took Rachel's hand, gripping it with surprising strength. "When Ethan says something, listen. The ancestors speak through him, even if he doesn't fully understand." Her eyes grew intense. "And remember, often the cure isn't about adding something but removing what's causing the harm." With those words echoing in her mind, Rachel said goodbye and hurried out. She needed to check the allergy test results and, more importantly, review the exact composition of the experimental medication Dr. Richard was receiving. When she reached the hospital pharmacy, she was met with surprise by Jennifer, the head pharmacist. "Rachel, I thought you were in the ICU with the director." "I need to check something urgently, Jennifer," she explained, trying to stay calm. "The experimental medication for Dr. Richard, do you have the full composition?" Jennifer raised an eyebrow but didn't question her. She quickly typed into the computer and turned the monitor toward Rachel. "Here it is. Why the sudden interest in the ingredients?" Rachel scanned the list carefully, and there it was. Sodium benzoate, listed among the excipients. Her heart raced. "Jennifer, did we ever check if Dr. Richard has an allergy to sodium benzoate?" The pharmacist blinked, confused. "It's an extremely common preservative. It's in practically everything, from sodas to medications. If he had a significant allergy, he'd have known long ago." "Not always," Rachel argued, remembering Grandmother Ruth's words. "Some allergies only show up at certain concentrations, or combinations. What if his condition is masking the typical signs of an allergic reaction?" Before Jennifer could respond, the phone rang. She answered quickly, and her face paled. "It's the ICU. They're looking for you. Dr. Richard is having severe arrhythmia." Rachel ran, her mind processing the information rapidly. If this was truly an allergic reaction, the director's condition would keep worsening as long as the medication remained in his system. She had to act even without definitive test confirmation. When she entered the ICU, she found the team in full alert. Dr. Michael was giving precise orders while the heart monitor displayed an alarmingly irregular rhythm. "Where were you?" he asked without looking away from the patient. "We need to stabilize him before Dr. Elizabeth arrives. She's already on her way." Rachel stepped closer, quickly checking the monitors and the IV drips. "Dr. Michael, I need to talk to you. It's about the suspected allergy." "Not now, Rachel," he snapped. "We're trying to reverse an arrhythmia." "That's exactly it," she insisted, lowering her voice. "The experimental medication contains sodium benzoate. If he has hypersensitivity to that preservative, the arrhythmia could be a symptom." Michael hesitated for a second, looking at her. "That's extremely rare. But it's possible," she argued, "and the symptoms started precisely after beginning this treatment." The doctor seemed torn between following protocol and considering the nurse's unlikely theory. At that moment, Dr. Elizabeth entered the room, her commanding presence immediately capturing everyone's attention. "Status?" she asked Michael directly. "Severe arrhythmia, unstable blood pressure. We're administering antiarrhythmics, but the response is limited." Dr. Elizabeth approached the bed, her experienced eyes examining every detail. "Did this start after the last dose of the experimental drug?" Rachel felt a surge of hope. The doctor had noticed the connection on her own. "Yes, doctor," she replied promptly, "and I believe it could be a reaction to the sodium benzoate in the formulation." Elizabeth gave Rachel a piercing look. "Basis for this suspicion?" Rachel took a deep breath. This was the moment of truth. Symptom pattern consistent with an atypical allergic reaction, timing of deterioration coinciding with medication administration, and she hesitated briefly. "I requested a specific test for this allergy, which hasn't been completed yet." To her surprise, Elizabeth didn't scold her for the unauthorized initiative. "Richard has a cousin with sodium benzoate hypersensitivity. I always suspected it might be genetic, but he never showed obvious symptoms." She turned to Michael. "Discontinue the experimental drug immediately. Prepare a dose of corticosteroids. And the specific antihistamine, Allashield," Rachel added almost unconsciously. Elizabeth nodded without questioning how the nurse knew the medication. "Exactly. And prepare dialysis in case we need to clear his system faster." As the team mobilized to follow orders, Rachel felt a mix of relief and bewilderment. How had a 10-year-old boy diagnosed something specialists hadn't considered? Grandmother Ruth's words echoed in her mind. The ancestors speak through him. In the following hours, Rachel remained vigilant by Dr. Richard's bedside. The monitors began showing signs of stabilization after stopping the problematic medication and starting treatment for the allergic reaction. Dialysis had been initiated as a precaution to speed up allergen removal. "It seems you were right," Dr. Elizabeth remarked, reviewing the new results that had just come in. "Positive for sodium benzoate hypersensitivity. Alarming levels." Rachel felt a weight lift from her shoulders. "We were lucky to catch it in time." Elizabeth looked at her curiously. "Luck? Or excellent clinical intuition?" "Nurse Rachel, I'd like to know exactly how you reached this conclusion." Before she could answer, the sound of quick, small footsteps drew her attention. Ethan stood at the ICU door, still in his school uniform, backpack on his shoulders. Beside him, a pediatric nurse looked embarrassed. "Sorry, Dr. Elizabeth. This boy insisted on coming here. Says he needs to see Nurse Rachel." Rachel felt Elizabeth's gaze shift between her and the boy, connecting the dots. "Let him in," the doctor authorized, to everyone's surprise. Ethan entered timidly, his dark eyes immediately searching for the patient in the bed. "The shadow is lighter now," he murmured, moving closer to Rachel. "You did it, miss." Dr. Elizabeth watched the scene intently. "You must be Ethan," she said, kneeling to his level. "I'm Dr. Elizabeth, Dr. Richard's physician." "I know," Ethan replied simply. "You're a good doctor, but sometimes you forget to look at the little things." Instead of taking offense, Elizabeth smiled. You're absolutely right. A young man, and it seems I have much to learn from you. She stood up, turning to Rachel. I believe I have an interesting story to hear, don't I? Rachel nodded, realizing there was much more to discover about the mysterious Ethan and his inexplicable gift. Meanwhile, on the bed beside them, Dr. Richard's heart monitor began showing an increasingly steady rhythm, as if life was finally returning to normal. What none of them knew was that this was only the beginning of a journey that would transform not just the director's life, but everyone's at Mercy General Hospital, especially the relationship between traditional medical science and knowledge. That goes beyond conventional understanding. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now, continuing, 3 days had passed since the discovery of the sodium benzoate allergy. Dr. Richard Anderson was still hospitalized, but his recovery was progressing steadily. Rachel had been assigned as his dedicated nurse, a silent acknowledgement of her crucial role in the correct diagnosis. It was early afternoon when Rachel entered room 307, carrying a tray with his scheduled medications. She found the director sitting in the chair by the window, pensively gazing at the Chicago sky. Good afternoon, Dr. Richard, she greeted with a smile. How are you feeling today? The man turned to face her. Despite the difficult days, he maintained the composed demeanor that defined him. At 62, his graying hair and serene expression exuded the quiet authority that had earned him respect throughout Illinois' medical community. Better, Rachel. Every day better, he replied, watching her prepare the medication. You know, I've been thinking a lot about what happened. Rachel nodded, focused on verifying the correct doses. It was a delicate situation, no doubt. Delicate? Richard chuckled lightly. An interesting euphemism for nearly disastrous. His expression grew more serious. Elizabeth told me how you insisted on the possibility of a drug allergy, against protocol, against the specialist's opinions. Rachel felt her face warm. She didn't know how much Dr. Elizabeth had shared about the case, especially regarding Ethan. I just followed my clinical intuition, Doctor. Richard studied her for a moment, his experienced eyes seeming to see beyond her words. Intuition, he repeated slowly. Or was it something more? Elizabeth mentioned a very special young consultant. The nurse nearly dropped the glass of water she was holding. So he knew about Ethan. Dr. Richard, I can explain that— No need, he interrupted gently. I'd actually like to meet him, the boy who saw what an entire team of specialists missed. Rachel hesitated. Since the incident, Ethan had returned to his usual routine of visiting his grandmother after school. She had seen him a few times, but the boy treated what happened with surprising nonchalance, as if diagnosing rare conditions was an everyday thing for him. I can talk to him, see if he'd like to come, she finally replied. But doctor, he's just a child, not a doctor or a medicine man, Richard finished, an enigmatic smile on his lips. Rachel, I've spent my life believing only in what science could prove. But when you come so close to the end, he paused meaningfully, you start to realize there are more things in heaven and earth than are dreamt of in our philosophy, as Shakespeare would say. The room intercom buzzed, interrupting the conversation. It was the director's secretary informing him about an urgent video call with the hospital's administrative board. Apparently, even on medical leave, Richard's commitments didn't stop. We'll talk later, Rachel, he said, preparing to take the call. And don't worry, I don't intend to turn our hospital into a center for alternative practices. Just broaden our horizons a bit. As she left the room, Rachel reflected on the director's words. There was an openness there, a willingness to consider possibilities beyond the strictly scientific. It was surprising coming from a man with Richard Anderson's impeccable academic record. Her shift would end in an hour, just enough time to stop by oncology and talk to Ethan if he was there. On the way, she crossed paths with Dr. Michael Roberts, who discreetly called her over to a quieter corner of the hallway. Rachel, we need to talk, he said, his expression serious. It's about Dr. Richard's case. She felt a twinge of apprehension. Despite the positive outcome, she knew she had bypassed protocols and hierarchies. Any issues with his progress? No, he's responding well to treatment. Michael adjusted his glasses, visibly uncomfortable. It's about how we reached the diagnosis. The medical board is intrigued, let's say." "Intrigued?" Rachel repeated, buying time. "Let's be direct. You ordered a specific test for an extremely rare condition, with no basis in classic symptoms or documented family history. And you were right." He studied her intently. "How?" Rachel weighed her options. Lying to a direct superior could have serious consequences. On the other hand, the full truth would sound absurd. "As I mentioned before, I noticed patterns in his symptom progression that aligned with the start of the experimental medication," she replied carefully. "And I had an enlightening conversation with an oncology patient who has the same condition. It wasn't exactly a lie, just an incomplete version of the facts." Michael didn't seem entirely convinced. "Rachel, you're an excellent nurse. 15 years of exemplary service. I understand that under pressure, especially when saving a life, let alone the director's, certain shortcuts might seem justified." He lowered his voice. "But there are rumors about a boy who supposedly gave you privileged information." Rachel's stomach dropped. How had the rumors spread so quickly? "Dr. Michael, my decision was based on clinical observation and I'm not here to accuse you," he interrupted. "I just want you to understand the delicate position we're in. Mercy General Hospital is a scientific institution. If we start basing medical decisions on—" He hesitated, searching for the right word. "Unexplained intuitions, where do we draw the line?" The question hung between them, heavy with implications. Rachel understood the concern perfectly. She herself would have harshly questioned any colleague who suggested following a child's advice to treat a critical patient. "I understand your concern, doctor. I assure you my conduct was professional, even if the path to the diagnosis was unconventional." Michael nodded slowly. "Dr. Elizabeth has called an emergency meeting for tomorrow. She wants to discuss the case, and you've been asked to attend." He lightly touched her shoulder. "Just be prepared. Not everyone is as open-minded as Richard and Elizabeth." With that warning, he walked away, leaving Rachel with a growing sense of unease. What had started as an unlikely encounter with a mysterious boy now threatened to become a clash between different visions of medicine. Determined to speak with Ethan before the meeting, she quickened her pace toward oncology. Upon arriving at room 215, she found Grandmother Ruth sleeping peacefully, but there was no sign of the boy. "If you're looking for Ethan, he's in the recreation room," a passing nurse's aide informed her. "He's working on a school project." Rachel thanked her and headed to the small room at the end of the hallway. Through the glass door, she saw Ethan sitting alone at a table, intently drawing something in a notebook. She knocked lightly before entering. "Hi, Ethan," she greeted softly. The boy looked up and a smile lit up his face. "Hi, Miss Rachel. Did you come to see how Dr. Richard is doing?" "Actually, I came to see you," she replied, sitting in a small chair beside him. "What are you drawing?" Ethan turned the notebook to show her. It was a simplified yet surprisingly detailed drawing of the human circulatory system. Beside it were notes in a child's handwriting. "When the bad medicine gets in, the blood gets angry." "Is this a science project?" Rachel asked, intrigued by the accuracy of the drawing for a child his age. "Sort of," he shrugged. "The teacher asked us to draw the human body, but I wanted to show how medicine works, or sometimes doesn't." Rachel studied the drawing more closely. Beyond the childlike description, there was an intuitive understanding of how an allergic reaction affects the circulatory system. "Ethan, how do you know these things?" she asked directly. "About medicine, illnesses, allergies?" The boy seemed to ponder the question, as if he'd never really thought about it before. "I just see it," he said, making a vague gesture with his hands. "Grandma says it's a gift from our Cherokee ancestors, but I think it's like when you look at the sky and know it's going to rain, even without the weatherman saying so. You just do know." The simplicity of his answer disarmed her. There was no pretense or mystification, just a child's natural acceptance of something that was part of who he was. "Dr. Richard would like to meet you," Rachel said. "He's very grateful for what you did." Ethan's eyes widened. "He knows about me." "Yes, and he was impressed. not scared or skeptical like you might think. The boy seemed to consider this. Can I go tomorrow, after school? He hesitated. But only if Grandma's okay. I have to visit her first. Of course, Rachel agreed. Ethan, there's something else. Tomorrow there's going to be a meeting with the doctors. They want to discuss how we figured out Dr. Richard's diagnosis. They want to understand you. His expression shifted, a shadow of worry crossing his young face. Are they going to think I'm weird? At school, some kids call me strange, because I talk about these things. Rachel's heart ached. Behind the extraordinary gift was still a child vulnerable to everyday cruelties. Some might not understand right away, she answered honestly, but people like Dr. Richard and Dr. Elizabeth are willing to listen, and that's a start. Ethan nodded, turning his attention back to the drawing. You know, Miss Rachel, there's a girl in pediatrics who also has a shadow on her medicine, he remarked casually as he colored a blood vessel red. Room 103. She takes asthma medicine, but it's not the right one for her. Rachel froze. Was this just childish talk, or another one of his mysterious insights? How do you know that, Ethan? Did you visit her? No, he replied without looking up from his drawing. I just saw her in the hallway when she was going for a lung test. The shadow around the medicine was really strong on her. Rachel made a mental note to discreetly check the case later. Part of her still resisted the idea of trusting such an unconventional diagnosis, but another part couldn't ignore what had happened with Dr. Richard. Ethan, I think it's important for you to know what you did helping Dr. Richard. Richard, it was very special. But it's also important to understand that doctors and nurses study for many years to do their jobs. Both kinds of knowledge are valuable in different ways. The boy looked at her with wisdom beyond his years. Grandma always says the head and the heart need to work together. One without the other is like a bird with only one wing. Rachel smiled, impressed by the depth of his thought. Your grandmother is very wise. She says I'm like my great-grandfather. He was a medicine man in her village, healed people just by looking at them. Ethan closed his notebook. Can I tell you a secret, Miss Rachel? Of course. Sometimes I'm afraid of this gift. His voice grew quieter. It's a big responsibility to know things others don't. What if I'm wrong someday? What if someone gets hurt because of me? The vulnerability in his confession struck Rachel deeply. It was easy to forget that behind the mysterious ability was a 10-year-old boy carrying an enormous weight. I understand that fear, Ethan. You know, even the most experienced doctors feel that way. That's why we work as a team, so different people can double-check decisions. Maybe that's how your gift should work too, as one piece of the puzzle, not the whole answer. The boy seemed to reflect on this, nodding slowly. Like, when I helped Dr. Richard, I saw the shadow, but you knew what to do. Exactly, together we're stronger than apart. Before they could continue, the alarm on Rachel's wristwatch sounded, reminding her she needed to return to the ICU for the end of her shift. I have to go now, Ethan, but I'll see you tomorrow, to visit Dr. Richard. Yes, he replied, childlike, enthusiasm returning to his voice. Can I bring him a drawing? I'm sure he'd love that. Rachel smiled, standing up. And Ethan, thank you for trusting me. As she left the recreation room, Rachel carried with her not just the responsibility of preparing for the next day's meeting, but also the growing certainty that her encounter with this extraordinary boy was the beginning of something much bigger than she could imagine, a path where science and intuition, academic knowledge and ancestral wisdom might perhaps find common ground. Yet not everyone at Mercy General Hospital would be willing to accept this possibility so easily, and that resistance would soon become the greatest challenge of her career. The night passed restlessly for Rachel. In her small apartment in Lincoln Park, she tossed and turned in bed, thinking about the next day's meeting and all its possible repercussions. Around 5 in the morning, she gave up trying to sleep and got up to make strong coffee. Sitting at the kitchen table, with the city still dark outside the window, she mentally reviewed the sequence of events since meeting Ethan. How would she explain to a committee of renowned doctors that she'd followed a child's advice? Even with the positive outcome, she knew many would see her actions as, at the very least, reckless. Her phone buzzed with a message. It was Michelle from oncology. Ruth had a fever during the night. She's stable now, but Ethan might not come today. Rachel felt a pang of concern, both for grandmother Ruth's condition and Ethan's possible absence from the meeting. Part of her wanted the boy there to confirm her story. Another part feared exposing him to skeptical professionals. She arrived at the hospital an hour before her shift began. She decided to stop by oncology first, where she found grandmother Ruth asleep, looking frail but in stable condition. The night nurse explained the fever had broken after medication, but the medical team was closely monitoring for any signs of infection, always a high risk for oncology patients. As she left the room, Rachel nearly collided with Dr. Elizabeth, who also seemed to have arrived early. "Good morning, Rachel," the doctor greeted her, "here to check on our little diagnostician's grandmother." There was a slightly amused tone in her voice, but her eyes remained serious and assessing. "Yes, doctor. I heard she had a fever during the night. I'm already aware. I ordered additional tests just as a precaution." Elizabeth gestured for them to walk together down the hallway. "Nervous about the meeting?" Rachel considered whether she should be completely honest. "A little," she finally admitted. "It's not every day I have to explain how a 10-year-old boy made a diagnosis that specialists didn't consider." Elizabeth smiled faintly. "You know, Rachel, in 40 years of medicine, I've learned that science has answers for many things, but not for everything." She lowered her voice. "My grandmother was a midwife in a small village in Louisiana. Illiterate, with no medical training, but she had an almost supernatural ability to predict complications in childbirth before any physical symptoms appeared." Rachel looked at her in surprise. Elizabeth Carroll was known for her unwavering scientific rigor. "Do you believe in medical intuition?" "I believe the human brain processes information in ways we still don't fully understand. Some people, like your young friend Ethan, seem to have a heightened sensitivity to subtle patterns most of us can't consciously perceive." She paused. "That doesn't mean abandoning the scientific method, Rachel. It means acknowledging its current limitations." They reached the hospital cafeteria, where Elizabeth ordered 2 coffees. "The meeting is at 10 a.m. in the main conference room. Richard himself insisted on attending, even against my medical advice." She handed one of the coffees to Rachel. "Some of those present will be less receptive to unconventional explanations, Dr. Peterson in particular." Rachel felt a knot in her stomach at the mention of that name. William Peterson, head of clinical research, was known for his relentless skepticism and his tendency to file administrative complaints against any practice he deemed unscientific. Rumors had it he'd been eyeing Richard's position for years. "I understand," Rachel replied, taking a sip of coffee to mask her nerves. "No, you don't fully understand yet," Elizabeth continued, her tone graver. "This isn't just a meeting about an unusual medical case, Rachel. It's a battle over different visions for this hospital's future. Richard has plans Peterson considers far too progressive." "What kind of plans?" Elizabeth checked her watch. "I don't have time to go into details now. But Richard sees what happened as an opportunity to implement certain changes he's been considering for some time." She lightly touched Rachel's arm. "Just be prepared. And remember, you're far from alone in this." With those cryptic words, the doctor walked away, leaving Rachel with even more questions than before. What exactly was Richard planning? And how did she and Ethan fit into those plans? Her shift passed without incident. Dr. Richard continued to improve, and the other patients under her care remained stable. At 9:45, she prepared for the meeting, giving herself one last check in the locker room mirror. Her face showed the weariness of sleepless nights, but her eyes held the determination that defined her. On her way to the conference room, she paused, briefly at the reception desk when she heard her name called. Ethan was there, accompanied by a middle-aged woman who introduced herself as his mother, Amanda. "Mom brought me to see Grandma," the boy explained, holding a colorful drawing, "and also to talk to Dr. Richard like you invited." Rachel looked hesitantly at Amanda, unsure how much the mother knew about the situation. "Ethan told me what happened," Amanda clarified, her expression a mix of pride and apprehension. "It's not the first time he senses things, but it's never been something this significant before." "Your son has an extraordinary gift, Ma'am," Rachel replied sincerely. "Amanda, please." She smiled briefly. "And yes, we've always known Ethan is special. My mother-in-law, Grandmother Ruth, says he inherited the gift from her Cherokee ancestors. My husband and I, well, let's just say we're trying to find a balance between valuing this sensitivity and making sure he has a normal childhood." "I understand completely." Rachel checked her watch. "Actually, I'm heading to a meeting right now where the case will be discussed. I'm not sure if it would be appropriate for Ethan—" "I want to go," the boy interrupted. "I can explain how I saw the shadow of the bad medicine." Rachel and Amanda exchanged glances. The mother seemed to ponder for a moment before answering, "If it's necessary, I think we can join briefly. But Ethan, remember what we talked about. You don't have to convince anyone about what you see or feel." The boy nodded solemnly, as if this were a lesson he'd heard many times before. "Let's see what's best," Rachel concluded. "Why don't you visit Grandmother Ruth while I'm in the meeting? If needed, I can call you later." Agreeing to meet later, Rachel headed to the conference room, where several people were already gathered. Dr. Richard sat at the head of the table, still visibly worn but with a determined glint in his eyes. Dr. Elizabeth was beside him, while Dr. Michael and other doctors filled the remaining seats. In a more distant corner, a stern-faced man Rachel recognized as Dr. Peterson watched everyone critically. "Ah, Nurse Rachel, join us," Richard invited, gesturing to an empty chair near him. A clear, symbolic gesture of support. She sat, aware of the mixed glances directed at her, some curious, others skeptical, a few outright hostile. "Before we begin formally," Richard said, his voice still weak but firm, "I'd like to express my deepest gratitude to Nurse Rachel Thompson. Her perception and courage to defend an unconventional hypothesis literally saved my life." Murmurs rippled through the room. Peterson cleared his throat loudly. "With all due respect, Dr. Anderson, we're here to discuss a significant deviation from medical protocol, not hand out praise." Richard smiled politely, but his eyes hardened. "Dr. Peterson, as the patient in question, I believe I have the right to express my gratitude, and as the director of this hospital, I also have the prerogative to conduct this meeting as I see fit." The tension was palpable. Elizabeth intervened gently. "I think we can reconcile both approaches. The outcome is undeniably positive, but we also need to understand the process for documentation and possibly institutional learning." Richard nodded. "Perfectly put, as always, Elizabeth." He turned to Rachel. "Nurse, could you recount, in your own words, how you arrived at the hypothesis of a sodium benzoate allergy?" All eyes turned to her. Rachel took a deep breath and began recounting the events, from her initial encounter with Ethan to the discovery of Grandmother Ruth's condition and the subsequent confirmation of the diagnosis. She chose complete honesty, knowing any attempt to downplay the boy's role would be uncovered. As she spoke, she watched the reactions around the table. Some doctors seemed intrigued, others clearly skeptical. Dr. Michael maintained a neutral, professional expression. Dr. Peterson, on the other hand, grew increasingly indignant. "Let me see if I understand correctly," he finally interrupted. "You altered the treatment of a critical patient based on the word of a 10-year-old child who claims to see shadows around medications. Put that way, it sounded absurd, even to Rachel." "Not exactly, Doctor. I used Ethan's observation as a starting point for further investigation, which included reviewing his grandmother's medical history and verifying the exact composition of the experimental drug. Even so, the catalyst for this entire investigation was a child's supernatural claim," Peterson insisted. "This is unacceptable in a serious medical institution." "William, please," Richard intervened. "No one is suggesting replacing scientific protocols with intuitions. But we can't ignore that, in this specific case, this unconventional approach produced results our traditional methods didn't achieve." Peterson adjusted his glasses with an irritated gesture. "What are we telling our residents, our students, that they should trust mystical hunches? This is a step back centuries." The discussion was heating up when the door opened softly. To Rachel's surprise, Ethan walked in, followed by his mother, who seemed embarrassed by the interruption. The sudden silence that fell over the room was almost tangible. "Sorry," Amanda said timidly. "They told us we could come in." Richard smiled warmly, his face lighting up. "And you're absolutely right. You must be Ethan." He extended his hand to the boy. "I'm Richard Anderson. I understand I have a lot to thank you for." Ethan stepped forward shyly, looking curiously at all the adults around the table. "You're better," he observed. "The bad medicine's shadow is almost all gone." Peterson let out an audible huff, but Richard seemed genuinely interested. "This shadow you mention, Ethan, could you tell us more about it?" The boy glanced at his mother, who nodded encouragingly, then at Rachel, who gave him a reassuring smile. "It's like a dark cloud around the person. It gets stronger near where the bad medicine is working." He made a vague gesture around his own chest. "On you it was here near the heart, and it was the same color as the shadow my grandma gets when she takes something with sodium benzoate." "Fascinating," Richard murmured. "And how long have you been able to see these visual indicators?" "Forever, I guess," Ethan replied with a shrug. "But I only understood what they meant when I started spending a lot of time at the hospital with Grandma. I saw that some people had shadows after taking medicine and others didn't." Peterson could no longer contain himself. "This is ridiculous. Are we seriously giving credibility to childish fantasies? This is a hospital, not a center for mysticism." Ethan looked at the exasperated doctor, his expression surprisingly calm. "You have a shadow too," he said simply. "A small one on your right wrist. It's from the blood pressure medicine you take." The silence that followed was absolute. Peterson's face visibly paled. It was little known that he had controlled hypertension with medication, a fact he kept discreet for fear it might affect his chances of promotion. "How did you—" he began, but stopped, clearly shaken. Elizabeth leaned forward, her expression now intensely curious. "Ethan, this shadow you see, does it just show that the medicine is present, or that it's causing some problem?" "It depends on the color and size," the boy explained, seeming more confident speaking about something he intuitively understood. "A light, small shadow like Dr. Peterson's means the medicine is working, but isn't perfectly right for the person. A dark, big shadow, like Dr. Richard had, means danger." Richard exchanged a meaningful glance with Elizabeth. "And can you suggest what the correct medication would be?" "Sometimes," replied Ethan, "when I've seen someone else take a better medicine for the same problem." A murmur spread through the room. Even the most skeptical doctors seemed intrigued, if not convinced. "I think we need to consider a few possibilities here," Richard finally said. "The first is that this young man has an extraordinary ability to observe, allowing him to notice subtle symptom patterns that even trained professionals miss. The second is that there are perceptual mechanisms our current science doesn't yet fully understand." Peterson partially regained his composure. "There's a third possibility, coincidence and suggestion. We can't base medical practices on unverifiable phenomena." "I completely agree," Richard surprised everyone. "That's exactly why I propose something concrete." He paused, looking around the table to ensure he had everyone's attention. "I'd like to establish a pilot project, a collaboration between our conventional medical team and consultants with exceptional observational skills, like our young Ethan here." The room erupted in overlapping voices. Some doctors protested vehemently, others seemed intrigued, and a few remained cautiously neutral. Rachel looked at Ethan and his mother, who appeared equally surprised by the proposal. Richard raised his hand, calling for silence. "I'm not suggesting replacing medical diagnoses with intuitive perceptions. I'm proposing an additional verification system, especially for difficult cases or those unresponsive to conventional treatments. Every observation would be rigorously tested by scientific methods before any clinical decision." "This sets a dangerous precedent," argued Peterson. "It opens the door to all kinds of quackery." "Or," countered Elizabeth, "it's an opportunity to expand our understanding of medicine. History is full of medical discoveries initially met with skepticism. Remember Semmelweis and antisepsis, or acupuncture, now even accepted by Medicare. The debate continued heatedly. Rachel watched, fascinated by the unexpected turn of events. What had begun as a potential disciplinary reprimand had turned into a discussion about the future of medicine at Mercy General Hospital. Ethan, meanwhile, seemed oblivious to the controversy he had sparked. He approached Richard and handed him the drawing he'd been carrying, a colorful depiction of the circulatory system, with small dark clouds being dispersed by rays of sunlight. "I made this for you," he said simply, "to remind you that sometimes we need new light to see old shadows." Richard looked at the drawing, then at the boy, and something in his eyes shifted subtly. "You know, Ethan, I think you just perfectly summarized what we're trying to do here." He turned to the room, holding up the drawing. "New light to see. Old shadows. Isn't that what medicine should always seek?" At that moment, Rachel realized that, regardless of the vote that would surely follow, something fundamental had changed at Mercy General Hospital. A door had opened to possibilities that until now had remained on the fringes of conventional medicine. And it had all started with an unlikely encounter in a hospital hallway, when an unknown boy told a desperate nurse, "I know how to heal him, miss." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now continuing me. 2 weeks had passed since the controversial meeting. Mercy General Hospital was buzzing with rumors about the New Light Project, as Richard's proposed initiative was being informally called. After intense debates, the administrative board had approved a 6-month trial period for the program, with strict guidelines and constant monitoring. Rachel arrived at work that Monday morning with a strange sense of anticipation. Today would be the project's first official day, and she had been assigned as assistant coordinator, working directly with Dr. Elizabeth. It was a surprising promotion and a huge responsibility. As she entered the old medical library space, now transformed into the project's operations center, she found Elizabeth organizing documents on a large circular table. "Good morning, Rachel," the doctor greeted without looking up from the papers. "Ready for the big day?" "As ready as I can be," Rachel answered honestly. "I'm still trying to figure out exactly how everything will work." Elizabeth finally looked up, a tired smile on her lips. "Same here. Richard has grand visions, but the practical details—" She made a vague gesture. "Let's just say we're improvising with method." The space had been reorganized into distinct areas, a section for individual consultations, another with basic medical equipment for immediate checkups, and a meeting room separated by glass partitions. At the center, the large circular table seemed to symbolize the philosophy of equality among different medical approaches. "Who exactly will be part of the project, besides Ethan?" Rachel asked, glancing around. "Oh, we have a small, eclectic team," Elizabeth replied, handing her a list. "Besides our conventional medical staff, Richard recruited some special talents." Rachel scanned the names. Alongside Ethan, officially listed as a junior observational consultant, a title created just for him, there were 4 other consultants. A 78-year-old retired midwife who had practiced for 5 decades in rural Illinois, a young man diagnosed with autism and a photographic memory, a physical therapist specializing in traditional Chinese medicine, and to Rachel's surprise, Grandmother Ruth. Grandmother Ruth is participating, but she's still in treatment. "It was actually her idea," Elizabeth explained. "When she heard about the project, she insisted on contributing, even if just for a few hours a week. Her oncologist approved, believes the mental activity could benefit her overall condition." Rachel still hadn't adjusted to the rapid changes. Just 2 weeks ago, any suggestion of incorporating unconventional knowledge would have been ridiculed by most of the hospital's doctors. Now, she was about to start a groundbreaking project that could potentially transform the entire institution's medical approach. The sound of the door opening interrupted her thoughts. Dr. Richard entered, followed by Ethan and his mother. The boy looked both shy and excited, wearing a blue t-shirt under a child-sized white lab coat with his name embroidered, another personal touch from Richard. "Good morning, ladies," the director greeted, his energy clearly restored after his recovery. Ready to make history. Before anyone could respond, another figure appeared at the door, Dr. Peterson. His expression was a mix of resignation and skepticism. "Dr. Anderson, may I have a word?" Richard sighed almost imperceptibly. "Of course, William. Ladies, please continue the preparations. Ethan, how about exploring the space?" As Richard and Peterson stepped away for a private conversation, Rachel approached Amanda and Ethan. "How are you feeling today?" she asked the boy. "A little nervous," he admitted, tugging at the sleeve of his small lab coat. "What if I can't see the shadows when everyone's watching?" It was a legitimate concern, and one that Rachel also secretly shared. The entire project depended largely on Ethan and the other consultants' mysterious abilities. What if it was just luck, coincidence? A one-time moment of inspiration that wouldn't happen again? "Ethan," she knelt to meet his eye level, "remember what we talked about. Your gift is like a tool. Sometimes it works better than others, and that's okay. We don't expect miracles from you." The boy nodded, not entirely convinced. "It's just that a lot of important people are expecting me to do special things." Amanda placed a hand on her son's shoulder. "And that's why we agreed. Anytime you want to stop or take a break, just say so. Nothing here is more important than you feeling safe and comfortable." Rachel felt a wave of gratitude for the mother's balanced approach. Many parents faced with the opportunity to see their child recognized for a special gift might push them beyond reason. Across the room, the conversation between Richard and Peterson seemed to be heating up. Though they kept their voices low, their tense body language was evident. "Institutionalized madness," Rachel caught from one of Peterson's remarks. "Can't responsibility for the hospital's reputation." Richard remained calm, but his posture was unwavering. Finally, with a gesture that seemed to end the discussion, he returned to the main group, while Peterson stayed back, clearly dissatisfied. "I apologize for the interruption," Richard said gently. "Now let's get to the practical details. Our first week will be an adaptive phase. No diagnosis or treatment suggestion will be implemented without going through the full scientific verification protocol." He turned to Ethan. "That means, young man, your initial work will mostly be observation. You'll visit pre-selected patients, always accompanied by Rachel or Dr. Elizabeth, and share your impressions only with them. No talking directly to patients about shadows." "Understood." Ethan nodded solemnly. "Yes, sir, it's like a medical secret, right?" Richard smiled. "Exactly. A very important medical secret." As the morning progressed, the other consultants arrived. Grandmother Ruth was brought in a wheelchair, but insisted on sitting at the main table like everyone else. Despite her physical frailty, her presence radiated a quiet strength that seemed to anchor the group. The young man with autism, Brandon, 22, carried a tablet where he meticulously recorded every observation in a system of color-coded notes only he fully understood. The former midwife, Ms. Dorothy, chatted animatedly with the physical therapist Jessica about different techniques for nonverbal patient assessments. It was an unlikely mix of people, united by what Richard called exceptional observational talents, abilities that, in one way or another, transcended or complemented conventional medical approaches. The first formal meeting was surprisingly practical. Elizabeth presented the work protocols, repeatedly emphasizing that all observations would be treated as preliminary hypotheses subject to rigorous scientific verification before any clinical application. "Our intention isn't to replace evidence-based medicine," she explained to the group, "but rather to explore possible paths that may have been overlooked due to limitations in our conventional methods." After lunch, the first practical observations began. 3 patients had agreed to participate in the experimental project: an elderly woman with chronic pain of undetermined origin, a middle-aged man with persistent fatigue unresponsive to conventional treatments, and a teenage girl with atypical neurological symptoms. Rachel accompanied Ethan on the visit to the 16-year-old teenager, Emily. The young girl had developed tremors and episodes of confusion 3 months prior, with neurological tests failing to find a definitive cause. "Remember," Rachel whispered before they entered the room, "just observe, we'll talk afterward." Emily was sitting on the bed, flipping through a magazine. When they entered, she looked up curiously, especially at the sight of Ethan in his small lab coat. "Hi," she greeted. "You must be the boy doctor everyone's talking about." Ethan flushed deeply. "I'm not a doctor," he corrected shyly. "I'm just helping." Rachel led a brief conversation, explaining the project again, while Ethan observed silently. After a few minutes, as the conversation flowed naturally, he began moving around the room, seemingly interested in random details. The position of the flowers by the window, the medicine bottles on the side table, the half-empty glass of water. Emily watched him with a mix of amusement and curiosity. "Cursor, is he looking for those famous shadows?" she asked directly. Rachel hesitated. The rumors had spread faster than she'd expected. "He has a unique way of observing," she replied diplomatically. "But we're all still learning how this process works." Ethan suddenly stopped near the side table, his gaze fixed on the water pitcher. "Do you drink a lot of water?" he asked, breaking the silence. Emily seemed surprised by the question. "I guess so. I'm always thirsty lately. And your water at home, what's it like? Does it taste different from the water here?" Rachel watched closely, intrigued by his line of questioning. "Now that you mention it, yes. At home we drink water from a clay filter. Here it's different, more, I don't know, chemical." Ethan nodded as if confirming something to himself, but asked no further questions. He continued his silent observation for a few more minutes until Rachel signaled it was time to leave. In the hallway, out of Emily's earshot, Rachel turned to Ethan. "What did you see?" "It's not the medicine," he answered immediately. "It's the water. There's a small shadow, but it grows every time she drinks." "The hospital's water?" Rachel frowned, confused. "Yes, but it's not just here." He seemed to search for the right words. "It's like something in the water isn't good for her, specifically for her. I saw the same kind of shadow last year when my schoolmate got skin rashes after moving to a new apartment." Rachel tried to process the information. Could it be a reaction to something in the water? Chlorine, fluoride, a specific mineral, or maybe... "Ethan, do you think it could be something in the pipes, maybe heavy metals?" The boy's eyes lit up with recognition. "Yes, the shadow has this sort of..." He gestured, trying to describe something only he could see. "Greenish tint at the edges, like when there's bad metal." Rachel took detailed notes. This was a completely new theory, one no one had considered. The medical team had focused on primary neurological causes, not potential environmental toxicity. "We'll request specific toxicology tests," she decided, "and we'll also ask about the house Emily lives in. Old building, old pipes. It could be an explanation." Ethan looked both relieved and proud that his observation was being taken seriously. "It worked, didn't it? I really saw it." Rachel smiled, genuinely impressed. "It worked perfectly, and you know what's most interesting? You didn't see the obvious, the medicine. You noticed something all of us overlooked." When they returned to the project room, the other groups were also coming back from their initial observations. The hum of excited conversations suggested everyone had discoveries to share. Richard stood in the center of the room, his face glowing with contained enthusiasm. "So how did our first forays go?" he asked the group. One by one, the reports were presented. Ms. Dorothy had noticed breathing patterns in the fatigued patient that suggested possible undiagnosed sleep apnea. Brandon had memorized every detail of the elderly woman's medication list and identified a potential drug interaction that had gone unnoticed. Jessica had observed micro-changes in posture, indicating a specific biomechanical issue, not just generalized pain. When Rachel shared Ethan's observation about the water and possible toxicity, Elizabeth immediately picked up the phone. "I'll order a full heavy metals panel, and I'll check if other patients from the same neighborhood have similar symptoms." Richard watched it all with an almost paternal satisfaction. "Just look," he remarked, more to himself than to the others. "A single day and we already have 4 new investigative directions, our conventional approach never considered." Dr. Peterson, who had been silently observing from the corner of the room, finally spoke up. "Interesting hypotheses, no doubt, but they still need rigorous scientific validation before any conclusions." "Absolutely right, William," Richard agreed readily. That's exactly the point. We're not abandoning the scientific method. We're expanding our sources of initial hypotheses. Rigorous verification remains unchanged. It was a delicate balance, Rachel thought, valuing unconventional intuitions and observations without abandoning scientific rigor. Could this really work long-term? Or was it just the initial excitement of a revolutionary project that would inevitably face practical obstacles and institutional resistance? At the end of that first day, as she organized her notes, Rachel was surprised by Grandmother Ruth. The elderly woman had dismissed the wheelchair and was walking slowly with the aid of a cane, approaching the desk where Rachel worked. "It was a good start," she commented, carefully sitting in the chair beside her. "But the road will be long." Rachel nodded. "Do you think it will work? This project, this integration of approaches?" Grandmother Ruth smiled, her wrinkles deepening around her eyes. "Depends on what you mean by work, my dear. If you expect universal acceptance and immediate transformation, then no. There will be resistance, skepticism, even sabotage." She paused, looking out the window at the sunset painting Chicago's sky in orange and pink. "But if you're asking whether this project will save lives that would otherwise be lost, open minds that would otherwise stay closed, honor knowledge that would otherwise be forgotten, then yes, it will work." Rachel felt an unexpected emotion tightening her throat. "How can you be so sure?" Grandmother Ruth took her hand, her fingers surprisingly firm. "Because I've seen this cycle many times, my dear. The new frightens, then intrigues, then is tested, then is accepted, then becomes the old resisting the next new thing." She chuckled softly. "It's the circle of knowledge's life." At that moment, Ethan rushed into the room, his eyes shining with excitement. "Grandma, Miss Rachel, Emily's test results came back, and there was metal in the water after all. Dr. Elizabeth said it was really impressive and that we'll run more tests tomorrow." Grandmother Ruth smiled at her grandson, then at Rachel, as if to say, "See? The first of many, my little one, the first of many." As she watched grandmother and grandson together, Rachel felt a growing certainty that, no matter the challenges ahead, and they would come, no doubt, something truly transformative had begun in that hospital. Something that had begun with simple words spoken by an unknown boy to a desperate nurse. "I know how to heal him, miss." Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. The New Light project gained momentum, collecting both successes and controversies. For every successful case where unconventional observations led to innovative diagnoses, there were sharp criticisms from the more traditional medical community. Rachel kept a meticulous journal documenting each case, every observation, every result. She was determined to build a body of evidence so solid that even the most stubborn skeptics would have to acknowledge the value of the integrated approach. One August afternoon, nearly 3 months after the project began, Rachel was organizing. Reports in her new office, a small space that had once served as an administrative storage room, now transformed into her workspace as Clinical Integration Coordinator, another title specially created by Richard. A soft knock at the door announced Elizabeth. "Am I interrupting?" the doctor asked, though she was already stepping inside. "Not at all." Rachel gestured to the only other chair in the cramped room. "Is something the matter?" Elizabeth sat down, placing a folder on the table. "Second quarter results. Impressive, I must say." Rachel opened the folder, quickly scanning the charts and tables. The project had treated 47 patients with conditions resistant to conventional treatments. In 31 cases, the observations of the special consultants had generated new diagnostic hypotheses. Of these, 22 were confirmed by subsequent tests, leading to changes in treatment. And most importantly, 19 patients had shown significant improvement after the interventions. 40% success rate in previously stagnant cases, Elizabeth summarized. "By any medical standard, that's remarkable. But we still face resistance," Rachel noted. "The recent articles in the Illinois Medical Journal expected criticism." Elizabeth shrugged. "It's always like this with disruptive innovations. Remember, Semmelweis was ridiculed for suggesting doctors wash their hands between autopsies and deliveries." Rachel smiled faintly. The comparison was generous, but the sentiment was similar. Every week it seemed there was a new editorial criticizing the project, questioning its scientific validity, or worse, suggesting it was a passing eccentricity of a hospital director, recovering from a traumatic experience. "How's Ethan?" Elizabeth asked, changing the subject. "I haven't seen him in a few days." "He's on school break, spending a week with cousins in the countryside." Rachel smiled at the thought of the boy. The time away has been good for him. I think we were all leaning on him a little too much. The bond between Rachel and Ethan's family had deepened over the past months. She had become a regular presence at Sunday dinners, a confidant for Amanda, and an ally for grandmother Ruth, whose condition fluctuated between periods of relative stability and acute crises. "And the other consultants?" Elizabeth continued. "Miss Dorothy's arthritis is acting up, so she's cut back her visits to just twice a week. Brandon's getting more precise with his observations on drug interactions. Frankly, I think he could teach the pharmacists a thing or two. And Jessica developed a notation system for documenting her physical observations that other physical therapists are starting to adopt." Elizabeth nodded, pleased. "Richard will love hearing all this. He's in Washington, D.C. today, presenting the project to representatives from the Department of Health. If all goes well, we could get federal funding to expand." Rachel's eyes widened. "Expand? But we're still consolidating what we have here." "That's exactly what I argued, but you know, Richard," Elizabeth sighed, though with a hint of affection. "When she has a vision, she won't rest until she sees it through completely. She's already talking about creating a research institute dedicated to integrated perceptive medicine, or whatever elegant term she's come up with this week." The conversation was interrupted by the insistent ringing of the phone. Rachel answered quickly, her face paling as she listened. "We're on our way," she said before hanging up. "It's grandmother Ruth. She had a severe episode in oncology. They're transferring her to the ICU." Elizabeth was on her feet before Rachel even finished speaking. "Let's go. Call the family." Rushing through the hospital corridors, Rachel tried to reach Amanda on her cell phone with no success. She left an urgent message, asking her to come to the hospital immediately. When they reached the ICU, they found the oncology team already completing the transfer. Grandmother Ruth was visibly weakened, her breathing labored, her skin an alarming shade of gray. "What happened?" Elizabeth asked the attending physician. "Sudden cardiorespiratory collapse," the oncologist replied. "We suspect a pulmonary embolism, but we're still evaluating. It was very sudden. She was talking normally one moment, and then—" Rachel approached the bed, taking grandmother Ruth's hand. The elderly woman opened her eyes briefly, recognizing her. "Ethan," she whispered weakly. "We're trying to reach the family," Rachel assured her. "He'll be here soon." Grandmother Ruth squeezed Rachel's hand faintly. "There won't be time." Her voice was barely a breath. "Tell him. The gift moves forward. He'll understand." Before Rachel could respond, the cardiac monitor sounded an alarm. The medical team sprang into action, gently moving Rachel aside as they began emergency procedures. The next hours passed in a blur. Resuscitation attempts, doctors rushing, equipment being wheeled in urgently. Rachel stayed close, helpless, watching the battle to save grandmother Ruth's life. Amanda arrived alone, her face streaked with tears. Rachel held her tightly. "Ethan?" Amanda asked. "Still out of town. My husband went to get him, but it's a 3-hour drive." Amanda looked anxiously toward the emergency room. "How is she?" Rachel didn't need to answer. The look on her face said it all. After 2 more hours of heroic efforts, the medical team finally had to accept the inevitable. Grandmother Ruth passed peacefully as the sun set beyond the hospital windows. Amanda wept silently, holding her mother-in-law's now cold hand. Rachel stayed by her side, offering what little comfort she could. "She knew," Amanda finally said. "Last night she was more talkative than usual, telling stories from the village, speaking of our Cherokee ancestors. It was like she was saying goodbye." Rachel remembered grandmother Ruth's last words. "The gift moves forward." There was a quiet acceptance in that ending, as if the elderly woman had simply completed a natural cycle. "How do we tell Ethan?" Amanda asked, her voice breaking. They were so close. He saw her as his connection to something greater. Rachel felt her own heart grow heavy. Over the last few months, Grandmother Ruth had become a mentor to her too, a bridge between seemingly incompatible worlds, structured scientific knowledge, and ancestral intuitive wisdom. "I'll be with you when you tell him," Rachel offered. "And after, for as long as you need." The night stretched on, turning to dawn. Rachel remained at the hospital, helping with the necessary arrangements, supporting Amanda, and processing her own grief. Around 5 in the morning, she received word that Ethan and his father had finally arrived. The meeting in the hospital chapel was devastating in its simplicity. Upon seeing his grandmother's body, Ethan didn't cry immediately. He approached slowly, touched her face gently, and then whispered, "Her light isn't here anymore." Only then did the tears come, silent, at first then in sobs that shook his small frame. Rachel and Amanda hugged him, forming a circle of comfort around the child. The following days were filled with grief and adjustment. The New Light project was temporarily suspended in honor of Grandmother Ruth, who had become a central figure in the initiative. Rachel divided her time between her hospital duties and supporting the grieving family. A week after the passing, as life slowly began to return to its rhythm, Rachel visited Ethan's home. She found him in the backyard, sitting under a tree, intensely sketching in a notebook. "Hi, Miss Rachel," he greeted without looking up from his drawing. "Hi, Ethan." She sat beside him. "What are you drawing?" He turned the notebook to show, it was a detailed portrait of Grandmother Ruth, not as she had been in recent months, weakened by illness, but young and strong, like in the old photographs displayed around the house. "It's beautiful," Rachel said sincerely. "Thank you." He resumed sketching, adding details. "Miss Rachel, do you believe people can still exist after they die?" The question caught her off guard. "Well, different people have different beliefs about that. Some believe in heaven, others in reincarnation, others that people live on in the memories and hearts of those left behind." "Grandma believed ancestors never truly leave us," Ethan interrupted, "that they keep guiding and teaching us." Rachel nodded, remembering her conversations with Grandmother Ruth. "She mentioned something like that to me a few times. Last night I dreamed of her," the boy continued, still focused on his drawing. "She was showing me something about the shadows, how to see them better, understand what they mean. It felt so real that when I woke up, I thought she was in the room with me." Rachel wasn't sure how to respond. Part of her scientific training hesitated to reinforce what might just be a comforting dream. But another part, shaped by the last few months, recognized there were mysteries beyond rational understanding. "Maybe she was," she finally said, "in some way." Ethan looked at her, his eyes both childlike and ancient. "She left a message for me, didn't she? At the hospital." "Yes." Rachel hesitated briefly. She said, "The gift moves forward. He will understand." The boy nodded slowly. "I do understand. It's like in the stories she told about the medicine men. Knowledge never dies. It just finds new guardians." He closed his sketchbook. "Grandma said I had to learn to control the gift, not let it control me." Rachel's heart ached at the maturity with which the boy handled his loss. "Do you want to keep going with the project, Ethan?" she asked gently. "No one would expect you to come back now or ever if you don't want to." Ethan was quiet for a moment, considering the question. "I want to go back," he finally answered. "It's what Grandma would have wanted. She always said gifts exist to be used to help others." 2 weeks later, the New Light project resumed its work. Her small ceremony in memory of Grandmother Ruth marked the restart, with a commemorative plaque installed at the entrance of the main room. "In honor of Ruth Araujo, guardian of ancestral wisdom and bridge between worlds of knowledge." Tita Searle. Elder's absence was deeply felt, but her spirit seemed to infuse the ongoing work. Ethan returned with a new serenity, his perception of the shadows seemingly sharper after the weeks of mourning. "It's like she taught me something important before leaving," he explained to Rachel during one of their sessions. Now I don't just see the shadow, but little lights inside them, as if they were paths to healing. The following months brought both challenges and victories for the project. Dr. Peterson remained a vocal critic, especially after Richard secured approval to expand the initiative. Yet the positive results were becoming harder to ignore, even for the most stubborn skeptics. One case in particular stood out as a turning point for the project's institutional acceptance. A patient transferred from another hospital, Harold Thompson, 58, had been diagnosed with a rare and incurable neurodegenerative disease. Months of conventional treatments had failed to slow his rapid decline. During his first visit with the patient, Ethan grew unusually restless. "It's not what they think," he insisted to Rachel as they left the room. "I don't see the typical shadow of degenerative diseases. It's different, more scattered, like it's coming from outside." Rachel, now more confident in the process, carefully documented the boy's observations and ordered additional tests, focusing on possible environmental or toxic causes rather than the genetic or autoimmune factors previously considered. The results stunned the entire team. Elevated mercury levels were detected in Harold's system. Further investigation revealed he had worked for decades in a factory where chronic exposure to low levels of the metal was common, a factor completely overlooked in his medical history. When chelation therapy began, the improvement was gradual, but undeniable. Conditions once deemed irreversible started stabilizing, and in some aspects even regressing. Harold Thompson's case led to publications in respected medical journals and drew attention from the national medical community. For the first time, critics like Dr. Peterson found themselves without convincing arguments against the integrated approach. One autumn afternoon, nearly 6 months after grandmother Ruth's passing, Rachel found Ethan sitting alone in the hospital garden, watching a group of birds peck at crumbs. "What's on your mind?" she asked, sitting beside him. "Just thinking about how much has changed since this all started," he replied thoughtfully. "Remember that first day, when I stopped you in the hallway?" Rachel smiled, vividly recalling the moment that had altered the course of so many lives. "How could I forget? I was desperate, exhausted, with no idea how to save Dr. Richard." "I was scared," Ethan admitted. "I'd never told anyone about the shadows before except Grandma. At school, when I tried once, the other kids laughed at me." "What gave you the courage that day?" Ethan thought for a moment. "The shadow around Dr. Richard was so dark, and you looked so sad. I felt like I had to try." He tossed a few more crumbs to the birds. "Grandma always said fear is the heaviest barrier between worlds. Worlds. The world of what we see and the world of what we feel," he shrugged. Her words, not mine. Just then they were interrupted by Dr. Richard, who approached with energetic strides, a far cry from the frail man of months past. "Ah, there you two are," he exclaimed excitedly. "I've got incredible news. The Department of Health approved funding to expand the project to 5 more public hospitals." Rachel felt a wave of conflicting emotions, pride in the recognition, joy at the chance to help more people, but also apprehension about the scale of expansion. "That's, wow, amazing," was all she could say. And that's not all. Richard sat down, barely containing his excitement. "The State University wants to establish a formal research line on what we're calling integrated perceptive medicine, with scholarships, rigorous scientific validation, international publications." Ethan looked from one to the other, trying to grasp the magnitude of the news. "Does this mean more people will do what we do here?" he asked. "Exactly," Richard confirmed. "We're at the beginning of something revolutionary, my boy. And it all started with you." Rachel noticed a slight discomfort in Ethan's expression. "That's a lot of responsibility to place on a child's shoulders, Richard," she remarked gently. The director seemed to realize his mistake. "You're absolutely right, Rachel." He turned to Ethan. "Forgive my overenthusiasm. What's happening is the result of many people's work and the courage of institutions to try something new. You were an important piece, but you don't carry the weight of this project alone." Ethan seemed to relax at those words. "Grandmother would be happy," he said simply. "She always said that one day the medicine of the white people and the medicine of our ancestors would speak to each other again." Richard smiled, visibly moved. Your grandmother was a very wise woman. He stood up. Well, I have a video conference in 10 minutes to discuss the next steps, but I wanted you both to hear it from me first. As Richard walked away, Rachel noticed Ethan seemed thoughtful again. Everything all right? She asked. I know it can sometimes feel like a lot of pressure. It's not that. He hesitated, searching for the right words. It's just, I don't think I'm the only one, you know. The only one with a gift like this. At my new school, there's an older girl in 7th grade. I saw her looking at the math teacher the same way I look at people with shadows, like she sees something no one else does. Rachel felt a shiver of recognition. Grandmother Ruth's final message echoed in her mind. The gift passes on. Have you talked to her? Yet? Not yet. It's hard to talk about these things. He kicked a small pebble on the ground. What if she thinks I'm crazy? Rachel smiled gently. Sometimes people need time to accept parts of themselves they don't fully understand. Maybe she's still in that phase. Or maybe she's waiting for someone who understands what she sees without judgment. Ethan considered her words. Like you did with me that day in the hallway? Exactly. Sometimes all we need is one person willing to listen to the unlikely. Rachel placed a hand on his shoulder. If you ever want to talk to her, just remember to be kind and patient, like you were with me. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now continuing. Months turned into a year. The anniversary of the New Light Project was celebrated with a symposium that brought together healthcare professionals from across the United States, all eager to learn about the pioneering initiative that was beginning to transform the perception of integrative medicine in the country. Rachel, now the executive director of the newly established Institute for Integrated Perceptive Medicine, watched with pride as the auditorium filled. In the front row, Ethan and his parents waited for the presentations to begin. Beside them, a girl of about 13 observed everything with curious eyes. Olivia, the schoolmate Ethan had finally found the courage to approach about her special gift. Dr. Richard took the stage for the opening speech. At 63, he radiated vitality and purpose, a far cry from the man who had once been on the brink of despair just a year before. Just over a year ago, I was lying in a hospital bed, my condition deteriorating rapidly, while the best specialists in the country stood powerless to identify the cause. Her voice rang clear through the auditorium. That's when an unlikely encounter changed everything. A dedicated nurse and an extraordinary boy crossed invisible boundaries between different forms of knowledge, saving my life, and in the process, sparking a quiet revolution in our approach to healthcare. From the audience, Ethan listened intently, his expression serious yet proud. Beside him, Olivia watched with growing fascination. What began as a small experimental project in a single hospital now spans 6 public institutions, with documented results in over 300 cases previously deemed untreatable or difficult to manage. Richard paused to let the information sink in. We're not abandoning science. We're expanding its boundaries, recognizing that there are multiple ways of observation and knowledge, which, when properly integrated, can transform lives. Rachel felt a deep emotion as she listened to his words. She thought of Grandmother Ruth and how happy she would have been to see the bridge being built between worlds that had remained separate for so long. The symposium continued with case presentations, methodological discussions, and debates about next steps. Doctors, nurses, physical therapists, and other healthcare professionals shared experiences of how integrating different approaches had transformed their practices. By the end of the day, as attendees dispersed, Rachel found Ethan and Olivia sitting on a bench in the hospital garden, chatting excitedly. So, what did you think of the symposium? She asked as she approached. It was amazing, Ethan exclaimed. All those people talking about how the project helped. I never imagined there were doctors willing to listen about things like what we see, Olivia remarked shyly. She was tall for her age, with curly hair and a usually reserved expression that now softened with admiration. Doctors are scientists after all, Rachel replied. And good scientists are always willing to investigate phenomena they don't fully understand, rather than simply dismissing them. Olivia's joining the junior project, Ethan announced excitedly. She sees the shadows differently than I do, more like waves of color. And she can tell when a treatment is about to work even before symptoms improve. Rachel smiled at the girl. It'll be a pleasure to have you on the team, Olivia, and I'm sure you and Ethan have much to learn from each other. As the sun began to set, casting golden hues over the hospital, Rachel reflected on the extraordinary journey that had begun with such simple words. I know how to heal you, miss. From an unlikely encounter in a moment of despair, a transformation had emerged, one that now spread like ripples in a pond, touching more and more lives. Grandmother Ruth's legacy lived on not only through Ethan, but through every person now opening themselves to possibilities beyond what ordinary eyes could see. The bridge between worlds she had dreamed of was being built, stone by stone, encounter by encounter. Watching Ethan and Olivia talk, two children united by an extraordinary gift they no longer had to hide, Rachel felt a deep certainty. Knowledge never truly dies. It simply finds new guardians, and through them, new ways to flourish and change the world. The end. Dear listener, were you moved by Rachel and Ethan's journey? Share your thoughts in the comments and tell us which moment touched your heart the most. Subscribe to the channel for more stories that unite science and sensitivity, tradition and innovation. Your support is our inspiration.